everybody. Okay, so my intent for this is to continue some of the deconstructing yang style playlist. As far as I know, as far as I'm thinking, that's still the title. That might change, possibly. But that is kind of where I'm going at with this. So this video is going to go over a couple of things. One is a short history, as it were, of sort of internal Yin Yang style Tai Chi Chuan. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of crazy stuff and all these people and places and things and everything like that. It's a sort of short history to be able to understand kind of where it came from. So again, the focus is Yang style Tai Chi Chuan, where it kind of came from and what's influenced it. So I want to go back even before Shaolin Temple. And there's sort of two threads that kind of feed into Shaolin Temple. One, if we're talking about, is from the native China, and then sort of things that came in from India. Now, again, I'm sure there's all sorts of other stuff going on. Again, this is sort of a short history. Again, I kind of want to put out something out with this, but this is going to kind of reiterate some of those things. So from China itself, you've got the native Taoism, and that comes from certain like shamanistic practices in the way old days and everything else like that. And that there's a lot of qigong with that, a lot of not animal mimicry so much, but that's kind of would come a little bit later, I think, too. But some animal mimicry, but it kind of has, again, that it's more of an internal practice. So a lot of the breathing, sort of qigong. Bruce Kumar Francis talks about that the old school Taoists had like 200 qigong postures, standing qigong postures. And it seems to be that you kind of start putting those together and flowing from one to the other, and you're starting to get like a qigong, even internal martial practice with that. Then you start changing the steps with it and the different stances and everything else like that. You've got a moving practice. So a lot of that sort of qigong, still probably some other martial principles native from China as well. But the Taoist sort of thought and spirituality, those qigong practices, the standing practices, the moving practices from China, as well as things like the indigenous shuaijiao. It's sort of like, the locking horns. If you're more familiar with judo, it's kind of similar to that, maybe even precursor to that. And that's got its own long and very rich history as well. But that's the sort of, every culture kind of has a native sort of wrestling kind of system, and shuaijiao is kind of one of the things that China has brought in from that as well. From that sort of Far Eastern area. And then from India, you have bringing in Buddhism, because Shaolin is a Chan Buddhist sect, which Chan later became like Zen in Japan. So that's coming in from that. But to imagine that it was simply Buddhism and nothing else is absurd to me. I would imagine that there would also be some of the yogic practices, and I don't, again, mean just the little gym bunny stuff that we see now, that the stretching and the inhale. Tons of people I've talked to that do yoga regularly and never taught breathing, never taught anything of the history of it. Like the mythology behind yoga was like Shiva was teaching that, and Parvati, I think it was Parvati, started doing those postures that he taught her and stuff. As almost an offering of herself, in terms of almost like a stress position sort of thing, to get him to start caring about the world again, because stuff was getting messed up. It was a way to be like, you gotta help and pay attention. Here we're doing this, and it was almost like the stress thing that she was doing kind of made him kind of wake up and pay attention. I'm sure I'm really lowballing that mythology with it. or anything. But it was something that I remembered it and kind of connected with, because it was like, this has this huge, rich mythology that no one knows, no one's practicing. You ask people what kind of breathing they practice the yoga, they were like, oh, you just breathe. It's like, no, there's specific breathing things that go with it. But there's also a native martial art in India called Kalai Payat, and that has a certain animal mimicry in terms of moves with that as well. I'm guessing that stuff like that probably filtered in as well. And all that kind of came into Shaolin Temple as sort of like this melting pot and like a cauldron sort of thing. Let's use some of the alchemist terms that are probably going to come up here or there or later. And then that exploded into its own thing, into its own unique sort of thing, that then after that exploded out and started creating all these other ideas and all these other systems and forms and everything else that blew out of, went up all around China in the east, even probably back into India, north into Mongolia, around into Korea, up into Japan, down into places like Thailand and everything else like that. So all this stuff sort of blew up out of there and was able to evolve in its own ways depending upon the individuals and their needs later on from that. So we have someone varying different hundreds or thousands of years ago. At the time, I think it was called Junbao. And he trained in Shaolin and then left and, and had either witnessed an actual fight between a crane and a snake or had a dream of a fight between a crane and a snake. And that inspired him to eventually took the name Sansan Feng and was on Wudang Mountain, which is a very sacred, holy place for Taoism anyway, and created, some will say, Tai Chi first, and there are some that will say created basically Chinese internal martial arts as a larger umbrella system. And if you look at some Wudang martial arts now, not the ones that say, okay, Wudang Xingyi, Wudang Bagua, Wudang Taiji, but like the Wudang like animal systems and stuff like that, there's definitely, you can tell, it's like there's some Shaolin-y stuff that it looks like. So um, I personally, for me, this is how I look at it. Personally, for me, I think the people who say San Sen Feng created Tai Chi, I think they're kind of selling him a little short. I think, again, this is me, and this is something that I had an idea kicking around for a few years. And then a few years ago, again, I've been doing this a while, I read a couple of books that had several people's sort of interviews and backgrounds and stuff in them. And I've seen other people have this idea too, where Sun Sen Feng created internal Kung Fu, internal wushu, not like the modern wushu that's movie magic flippity flu acrobatics sort of thing. Amazing acrobatics, amazing flexibility, agility, and athletics, true. Martial principle, maybe not as great in terms of the actual art itself, not the individual. um, but it seems to me that he would have created internal martial arts, and as he studied and went to Wudang Mountain, studied more Taoism, and then took what he learned from Shaolin Temple, folded in now much more of the native Taoism, kind of put the two together and created internal martial arts kind of as a larger sort of blanket thing. These are the sort of principles of an internal martial art practitioner. And that's what again, this is my insight on it, my opinion of it. Again, there's some people who even say like Sun Tzu Feng wasn't even a real person, like Lao Tzu. We don't even know if some of these people we might even know are real. But that's kind of what it seems to me. So he learned from Shaolin, took those principles, brought Taoism much more back into it, created internals. Now, something else I was thinking of. A lot of these mythologies with some of these, famous kung fu people, stuff gets blown up. So there is a lightness skill, and we'll kind of allow you to do like cool stuff in terms of jumping, running up parts of walls, doing all this other stuff. But, kind of play that historical telephone game and everything else like that. And then that starts being, well, now my master could jump over a wall, or my great grandmaster could fly from rooftop to rooftop. So you get all like these cool things that have influenced movies and books and everything from that we see now and everything else like that. I wonder if Sun Sen Feng, uh, hypothetically speaking, was a Sun Sen Feng. I wonder if there wasn't a fight between a snake and a crane, if there wasn't a dream between a snake and a crane. I wonder if his specialities in terms of the Shaolin fists and the animals that were taught from Shaolin, if his specialities weren't crane boxing and snake boxing. I think from what I understand, everyone has to learn certain compulsory routines and practices, and then people start working on what they're really good at and stuff later on. I wonder if crane and snake boxings weren't things that he was really good at, and then that influenced him and what he did once he went back and put the Taoism into it. That's my guess. So time goes on, and there was a man named Chenwan Ting. Chenwan Ting, from my understanding, was a military man for a long time. Retired, went back to Chen village, and then, so he would have had to have learned combat. There was probably a lot of Swai Jiao involved with it, and maybe some other possibly Shaolin-inspired fist routines and things like that. But he would have had all this martial training, and then in his retirement, this is now the beginning of Chen-style Tai Chi Chuan. Now, Tai Chi Chuan, Tai Chi isn't Tai Chi, as we see it as Tai, and then Chi is in the energy Chi. It's not that. Tai Chi is the grand ultimate. So Tai Chi Chuan is grand ultimate fist. Remember, Chuan means boxing or a martial arts method. Or it's a martial, it denotes a martial. I think Fa is like the method of something, but Chuan is like fist or boxing. It's a martial art. So Tai Chi, you have, you start with Wu Ji, which is no thing. That's the sort of undifferentiated whole. You have the Taiji, which is like the one thing. And Taiji breaks down into yin and yang. And yin and yang break down into the four things, greater and lesser yin and yang respectively. But that's after you have the three things. So you have, the one whole, and then the two break down, that makes three. And then that breaks down into the four, then you have the five elements, and then the Bagua, and then the I Ching, and then everything. So that folding back up into that structure. So every culture again almost has like a genesis, right? You've got, even Tolkien has a whole thing with that. So you have the sort of chaos of beginning of nothing, and then there's one thing, and that one thing makes other stuff, and then makes other stuff, and then it gets more complex as you get down. The idea is to take away that complexity and get back up to the more general. And that highest thing right before Wuji is Taiji, the grand ultimate thing, before you can now release that. So that's Taiji. So again, my guess is that in his retirement, there was probably either having learned practices from Wudong Mountain. So if we talk about like the San Sen Feng stuff, we'll just call it Wudong martial arts. So there's Shaolin, which is like the external, Wudong, which is like the internal. So whether or not he learned specifically like Wudong Kung Fu, or whether he took the martial stuff that he had to learn being in literal martial life for so long, and then again folded Taoist stuff back into it, I don't know. But it looks like that, when he did that, he was able to, um, play with it and learn from it, and developed what's now determined is to be Chen style Tai Chi Chuan, or Chen family Tai Chi Chuan. This is hundreds of years ago, long time, and a lot of families had developed their own martial arts and kept it within the families or kept it within the villages because that's how they were staying safe. They legitimately had to worry about bandits and raids and all this other stuff like that. Or maybe there was some government official who was going to come after them and defend themselves. It was a very different sort of mindset to what we have now. This isn't just some guy who was like, I like being a bully. I like going to bars and beat the snot out of people in bars. So I'm going to learn how to do this really fast so I can be a badass fighter. Some dude who's got some dude mentality being a bully and just likes hurting people. Hurting people is easy. This isn't about that. This was literally life and death for a lot of these people. And in these villages and these families and these times and everything else like that, which is one of the reasons why I personally take a lot of this stuff very seriously, because there are people who have literally lived and died to bring this down through the centuries to us to try and help people make their lives better. And even if that just means being able to see tomorrow, in the face of someone coming at you with a big old sword or something like that, then that's important. We don't have to worry about a lot of that so much now. And if we do, I mean, firearms changed a lot of things anyway, too. But it's still a really good personal cultivation thing, and it's really good to learn because there might be self-defense situations where this is still in handy. So time goes on, and there was someone named Yang Lu-sen. And this is early 1800s, so early 19th century. He had again, already learned some other fist routines and stuff like that, some external stuff, probably some Shaolin. And the sort of legend has it. Now, some of this again is some of that history telephone game. Some of it's a little bit legendary, and some of it has basis in fact too. So the legend sort of has it that he was defeated. The only person to really beat him, like he was really good, and the only person to really defeat him was a Chen, someone playing Chen style Tai Chi Chuan, and it was kept within the family. And because of that, he was like, hey, cool, I got to learn this now. Someone actually beat me. This is cool. I don't know what the heck he just did, but I got to learn that. So again, this is sort of I think one thing I read, I think refers to this as being murky, and that seems pretty accurate. But at the time, the sort of patriarch, the sort of head with it was, I'm kind of looking here because I want to also make sure I get some names correct, because a couple times I get confused in names. Chen Chung Xing, I think. So again, Chen Chung Xing. And I will issue my usual apology for destroying names and destroying pronunciations. I'm doing the best I can. I do have a thing about pronouncing things correctly. I'll actually say croissant. Because that's how it's supposed to be said. Things like that. Anyway, that was a sort of head. That was the guy in charge of anything. And so when Yang Lu-sen wanted to learn, he was like, no, you can't. You're not a Chen. You're not from the village. We're keeping this in the family, in the village. No, you can't. This is our family martial art. This is how we're keeping ourselves safe. So there's a couple things where it was either, and this has been on film in a couple different ways too. So there's one where he was pretending either to be a beggar or pretending to be a servant in the household or a servant in the village, and he would sort of go about his day, just kind of keep his eye on things, and then like he would secretly watch people training. Excuse me. So as he secretly was watching people training, he would go and then practice what he saw as best as he could. Again, not getting indoor, personal training sort of thing, or closed door training, but he's doing the best he can with what he can find and what he can see. But then it came out that, it looks like, he was training, and he was sort of told, it's like, here, either he was found out and made to spar with somebody, or it was just sort of like, oh, we need someone to spar with him. You've been around here before. I remember you're asking to do this. Go spar with him or something. And he ended up doing pretty damn good. And he ended up doing pretty damn good, basically with Chen Taiji. And they were like, oh, snap! Like, that's not right. Um, and I think some of the mindset of some of the people was like, well, we got to execute this guy. This is our secret family sort of thing. We've got to get rid of him. I believe it was actually Chen Ting himself who was like, no, there's potential here, and I don't want to sort of destroy that potential. So he trained Yang for a long time, and Yang eventually went back and he started teaching people too, and he started kind of changing it and adapting it, as people do, to kind of his own thing. Um, and just began sort of turning it a little bit more into what was going on now. There was, again, as Bruce Kumar Francis would say, Taiji is sort of thy will be done, yield and redirect. You sort of neutralize and let the other person kind of defeat themselves with their own motions, their own strength, while you use power. And he got very good at that, and good enough that I believe he was not only, you know, was it unbeatable or invincible Yang or something like that? Was that the name for it? I can't remember his nickname. He was like invincible or unbeatable Yang. And then he was eventually sort of hired in to start teaching at the Imperial Palace. So I think some of the guards and stuff like that were learning some of like the more martial principles, and I believe, again, this is stuff that I've read. I wasn't there, but I believe that he was also teaching some of the more, noble people, quote unquote, that as well. And that might be where some of the more contiguously soft and relaxed, Yang style is kind of, you watch Yang style play, and there's kind of like a through line of relaxation and speed that you want through all of it. Chen's more dynamic, even the old friend, the Laojia routines, even the Laojia Ilu, which is what Yang style is kind of based off of. Erlu is the cannon fist. That one's, has more of the Fa Jing in it. The Laojia Ilu, the old frame first routine, is really what Yang style is based off of. And then if you look into the Wus and Sun, it's very similar to kind of that too. So that Laojia Ilu from Chen style kind of set the routine, kind of what a long form for Tai Chi is going to be. So that might be where some of the beginnings of how we have Yang style now might have been with how he was training the more well-to-do as opposed to the elite guards. He had a couple of sons who were also very good martial artists and taught Yang style as well. There was one of his sons, Yang Ban Hao, who played a sort of smaller frame version of it. And I've never read an account about Yang Ban Hao that said he was a nice guy or a decent person to be around. A lot of accounts are saying that he was pretty aggressive, maybe even pretty much like a bully, things like that. And but he was a damn good fighter. And then the third generation, Yang Lusen's grandson, Yang Chenfu. Now I've read where he was kind of ho-hum about learning the family art at first, and then eventually did and was like a phenom. Bigger guy. Apparently, I've read a couple things that weren't exactly too kind about him in terms of certain appetites, things like that. But I've only read them in one or two places, so I don't know how well that can be attributed to the man. But he was also what can't really be disputed. He was also really good in terms of fighting. I mean, he could even defeat people from a chair, um, which I've actually felt kind of how to do that and neutralize from a chair before. It's difficult and it's weird when you feel it. Is the best I can say with it. But yeah, so he was sort of teaching, and that's let me rephrase this. Yang Chen Fu pretty much set Yang style as we know it and see it now. So the routine that's practiced and how it's practiced by and large was set by Yang Chen Fu. So this is like early 20th century. I believe in the last couple decades there's been some other little tweaks and little changes that have been put to it because a lot of it for Yang style has been sort of moved into the now health, relaxation, you know, less martial sort of realms. Now, everything Chen style can do in terms of what it's doing for martial practices, the fudging, the silk reeling, dynamic stances, strong but not tense and everything like that, Yang style can be able to do as well. Depends upon how you train it. Part of the problem is Yang style is also basically kind of the one that's really being taught as that sort of hippie air dancing. Everything's super relaxed and cool. And so any of the anima in it, the animation to it, the shen with it, the spirit of it, and even the qi and the jing, the energy and the expression of it kind of bleeds out because people don't understand the actual principles that should be going on into it. Um, I'm not blaming Yan Chen Fu for that. I'm not blaming any of the Yangs for that anyway. Again, it's the same thing as you see it in music all the time too. When you have a band or some movement that's really huge and cool and could be socially powerful, and then the producers get a hold of it and they figure out a formula. They skim only a very thin amount of what the thing really is, and then they just keep producing a bunch of garbage based on the formula. Punk did it. It happened to punk. Happened to rap and hip hop. Big time to rap and hip hop. It used to be a social movement. It meant something back in the day. Now it's just like, oh well, all anyone wants is this certain type of thing with it, and we have people who have a gimmick, and we throw that out at people. It's Jurassic Park, and they patented it and packaged it, and now they're selling it, and they sell it. Well, that's Taiji is no different from this too. It's had that as well. Chen style as well is with it, but we're talking about Yang style, and Yang style is kind of, I think, been the sort of punching bag of what people who misunderstand Tai Chi, including people who practice Tai Chi, have kind of pointed to. It's like, see, it's just relaxed and smooth. It's all you need to do. It's like, well, there's a reason for all that. And unless you're studying that reason, unless you're still putting Qi, Jing, and Shen into it, unless there's still martial principles into it, unless you're practicing and figuring out where the 8 energies are and how they're matching in with the 5 steppings and all that other stuff, unless you're doing all that, you're not doing Tai Chi. So all the little fun stuff. And I like woo. Again, I've said this before. I like woo-woo stuff. Woo-woo stuff's fun. At the very least, it's fun. But even with that, you can fall off a deep end into ridiculousness because this all this stuff had an actual purpose as a foundation that can easily get washed away by people just playing around in their egos. Um, so yeah, he set the form, and the idea that okay, you can play it a little bit differently. Maybe some of the smaller motions can be more for martial principles. Bigger, wider, more open can now help with the relax and the qigong aspect too. Now, it should be said that Chen style is a large frame taiji. Yang style is also, I think, generally considered big frame, large frame. But you can kind of do it. You can still play it small. You can play any of them however you want. And I personally agree with play with it in a bunch of different ways. And then you kind of learn small and you learn big. Because if you learn big, you should learn small. If you learn small, you should learn big. The big, you might not, if the motion is in here like this, you're not going to play that in fighting. It might be this. But if you have the intent and the energy of this in here, it makes this much more effective. So learn both. But yeah, so he set that in with the thing, set the even tempo and the sort of even head level and stuff like that too, and set the postures and the routine the way it is. Am I right that his grandson, or is it Yang Chen Fu's actual like later son? No, it might have been a later son, Yang Zhendao. Carried it on for much of the 20th century, and then so that would have been like fourth generation, and then he passed on the lineage to Yang Jun, and Yang Jun is the person who's sort of like the head person for the family now. You might have heard names like Chenwan Ting. Chenwan Ting has, his sort of thing is almost like a small yang style. And that also kind of perpetuated a lot of bad Tai Chi playing. Not that he was a bad teacher or a bad person, had bad thing, but again, that sort of skimming off the top, just a real incorrect idea of Tai Chi kind of came out of that too. Because if you watch some of the footage or pictures of him, there's still intent, there's still energy with what he does, but people don't carry that on. They just oh well, he played like this, so I'm gonna play like this too. We played like this, and he had like energy behind it as well. There's a with that. A lot of people don't have. A lot of people don't even know about or don't even look for. So again, this is why I was talking about in the other video, trying to inoculating to a certain amount some things with some of the way stuff's going on now, and try and feed back in some level of what the people who came before and practiced their whole lives, and some people even died for, to give this to us, to bring this back in, to get our heads out of our own asses, and get our heads out of the modern culture really putrescent layer of garbage that we kind of view everything in, and bring it back in. So that is a sort of brief history of internals, and then how it comes in through with Yang style. So yeah, again, they're even teaching like elite guards in the Imperial Palace. It was able to survive, the Cultural Revolution. It was the main sort of base for the compulsory routine that you see. So if you see like a lot of times it'll be listed as Yang 24, but it could be simplified or Beijing. But it's the 24 thing that's the compulsory routine that came out in the 50s. The base for it is Yang style, but there's other stuff from other family styles in with it too. But the base is sort of Yang style for that. It's been kind of transmuted through there. There are some people who, I think like Bruce Kumar Francis, I think even Yang Ming, who's not, I don't think he's part of the actual Yang family like that. It's like Smith is, even though the surname is the same, it's different families. Talk about lineages that not necessarily circumvent Yang Chen Fu, but might be more what Yang Chen Fu was playing before he set the routine the way it is now, or maybe even from one of Yang Lusen's other sons, like Long Bong Hao or something like that, as opposed to Yang Chen Fu. So there are people who will talk about lineages that come from something other than Yang Chen Fu, but is still Yang style Tai Chi technically. And then, yeah, it's arguably probably the most popular in terms of numbers of people who play it. It's been more widely dispersed and disseminated than like Chen style or the Wu styles, either one, Wu or Wu Hao, or Sun style or anything else like that. Second, maybe to the government forms. I think there's like a 48 and then a 24. I don't know if they have the longer, like 108 or a longer version. But those, if you play them, it's interesting. They feel different. They actually feel different. Even if you still play it with the same intensity, they still feel different. I think the feel was basically to really promote the health, maybe not even the meditation or the qigong, just the health, and then have like the sort of fitness and flexibility and stuff like that in it. And there's certain compulsory routines that play in China. They even dictate, if you're going to play these compulsory forms, like the 24 compulsory form, if you're a male, your tunic has to look a certain way and have a certain number of buttons. You're a female, your tunic has to look a certain way, have a certain number of buttons, and have it over the shoulder. Like it's completely regulated. The compulsory form's completely regulated. Um, so yeah, and then my teacher was Master Rick Mayer. His first teacher was Master Will Duncan. Will Duncan learned internals. Had his he was a Shotokan karate guy. Learned some kung fu from Joe Panaccioni. His internals teacher was Grandmaster Hu Wei Yu from Shanghai. Um, Master Duncan turned my teacher up to Master Hu as well. Master Hu's teachers were Bai Bing Ru, Hua Chun Rong, and Yi Da Mi. Hua Chun Rong was actually, I think, a palace guard as well. And then they came in from like Yang Chen Fu and Sun Lutong and things like that as well. Guys like that as well. So the people who sort of started certain arts. And then there's me. A couple other people have also learned from my teacher, and I've been kind of set loose in terms of teaching. I don't have any teachers under me as yet, but I've had a lot of students in a lot of different places and things like that, and done a bunch of demos either with the Asian festival around here, schools, health fairs, just martial arts school stuff, uh, demos at martial arts tournaments, demos with the OCA Greater Cleveland Dragon Dance team. I'm the pearl and the flag for that, and sometimes they're just like, we need to fill some time, do some Tai Chi. I'm like, oh, okay. And things like that, and everything else. So, and again, I try and go back. There's a Fu Zhong Wen book that is, has a lot of the pictures from Yang Cheng Fu in it, and it's kind of like a direct lineage transmission of his stuff. And there's a couple other books that I have that are transmissions with that. They're very interesting. So that's that. That's a sort of short history of Yang style Tai Chi Chuan. Thank you, and I hope that's helpful.